Hang on, there we go. Okay. So while we're sketching and figuring out this observation, whoops, we're moving quickly. I'm moving quickly around this. Blocking in the shape of sort of where his eyes are, and notice where I initially put that circle was too low, and I'm just readjusting it quickly as I'm doing it. Trying to get a sense of that nose, shape of that nose as I'm sketching. Overall shape of the bridge of that nose. He has very deep set eyes, so I'm going to try to start folding that in there. His face is really scrunched up here, so we need to get a line to sort of represent where that mouth is. And notice with all of this, you can see this line sort of running around his face here. If that's that center line, you can start seeing that there's essentially an ellipse happening here. So, Joy, you probably haven't reached this point yet, but Yuhan and Irong definitely have, where they're working with the character rotation. So what you want to do is start seeing how these lines wrap around the entire head. Because once you see them wrapping around the entire head, the character will become more dimensional. So as I'm sketching, I'm thinking about that roundness. And that roundness kind of exists everywhere on the figure as we're drawing him. So as you can see, I'm slowly building this sketch up of the character. It still doesn't look like him yet, and it's not going to for a while, but I'm trying to get certain pieces built in. Noticing this chin. And you notice how slowly this builds up. This builds up over a very, very long period of time. I've been talking and sketching this for probably a good 5 minutes now. Get some sense of that hairline. You have to start seeing sort of where this overall shape of the hairline is. You don't want to just, and this is one thing that I see with just about everybody too, is when you start putting hair in, you just start doing this. You just start putting lines in, and that just doesn't work because that's not how hair is built. So you have to start figuring out firstly where that hairline is. And that's what we're doing here. I'm trying to figure out, because now that I have this circular shape, okay, so where, and I'm using this, I'm observing this, I'm using this as reference. How does this shape, how do I represent that shape? And then I start figuring out the shapes of that hair. Sort of and you can see very clearly because his hair is wet, you can kind of see which directions the hair is going. And you can kind of start blocking those in. And once you have those blocked in, it's a lot easier to draw the rest of the hair on the character, or at least on the portrait, I should say. Oh, oops. So I'm just going to kind of keep at this for a little while. And this is what sketching looks like, which is a very, very long, slow, and can sometimes be a very tedious process. But as you do it, you start seeing elements that are working. So you start finding spots that you can darken in. So you notice how those eyes are starting to darken. You notice how this eye is starting to darken. You can start putting some elements here. You can see these lines right here on his head. Those aren't his eyebrows. That's just, his eyebrows are folded underneath here. We can't really see them. So you guys both did, all three of you actually did, the portrait assignment. So if we look at, let me do that again. If we look at the eye sockets on the skull, so if his eyes are sat in here and the eyebrows are over top, resting on top of the ridge of that, his head is tilted so far down that we can't really see his eyebrows. So I'm not really concerned about putting those in. What I am concerned about is finding these shapes. And we can see, if you look closely, you can see this shape happening and this shape happening. So that's the stuff that you really have to start paying attention to when you're doing observational drawing. So I'm seeing those, sketching those in really quickly. Again, not paying much attention to making any of this perfect yet, because that's not the point of this. The point of this is to get a feel for what I'm actually drawing. So now I can start, sort of changing the shape of that nose, and I don't really like it. I made it too narrow toward the end. So let's just go back and start fixing that. And then same thing here. We see his really deep inset cheekbones, and those are going to be on both sides. And notice how they connect up here into that plane on his on the side of his skull. So that's a good indication for me as to where to space these as I'm quickly sketching. All right. So now I can start shaping and molding that face a little bit. Get in there and start giving the lips some shape. He's got a bit of a snarl on him, so getting the shape of those lips is going to be kind of challenging, but we just kind of work away on it. And you'll notice things like, you can see a shape here and a shape here under his lips, but it all kind of ties in. And then you've got the chin. So essentially what you're doing when you're sketching is you're starting to find all of these pieces. And that's what I'm doing. I don't know how to draw this man. I've never drawn him before. So I'm just kind of piecing him together slowly and finding the bits that I want. And this is when I talk about sketching and when I talk about observational drawing, this is what I'm talking about, is we really have to take some time and pay attention to what we're drawing. Drawing is not one of those processes that we can finish up really quick, that we can leap into a finished image of right away. It just doesn't work that way. So you notice as I'm drawing his ear, I'm exploring the different shapes. So I'm finding, this dark area here, then this dark area here. Then I notice how this shape bends around here, and then there's some additional shape to the ear there. So in doing that, I can start shaping what I have a lot more clearly. Now remember that wrapping around that I said before. That wrapping around, that ellipse that wraps all the way around the head. When I'm sketching this, I'm considering that as well. So that's where you start figuring out how this side here affects this side. So that's where that ellipse comes in really handy. So now, if I can get that ellipse sort of consistent from top to bottom, then I can get a pretty good sense of where that ear is actually supposed to be sitting. There, that's not bad. So we just slowly kind of keep building this at sort of a snail's pace, because this is just how it goes. The sketching process is a very long and tedious one. But this is really the fun part of drawing. This is where you get to experiment a lot. When you're using observational drawing and when you're using reference, you're not having to think an awful lot. The thinking that you're doing is mostly observing what you see and then drawing what you see. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. So as I've been showing you guys, what I've been looking at as I've been drawing him is trying to find those differing elements. So I'm looking for things like that shape that we see there. See how that cheekbone comes in here. You start noticing how things kind of connect together, and that's part of the observation that you need to do. So when I keep stressing and saying observation, it's this specifically. Let me just erase that so I can see what I'm doing. This is what you're supposed to be looking for. Is you're supposed to be taking your time and really deconstructing what you're seeing. So at some point you will get to that point where you can draw things without giving it that much thought, and they come out reasonably well. But by the same token, you have to develop something called muscle memory. Now, muscle memory comes from sketching this stuff enough that your hand begins to remember what it's doing. So for me, I'm actually doing a lot more sketching on this than I normally would. And that's for your guys' benefit, because I've done this enough that I'd be comfortable enough sketching this guy with far, far fewer lines. But for your guys' sake, I want you to see sort of how this process starts. And you notice, like, you know, now he's starting to take shape. The actual shape of the character is starting to look a little bit more like the reference that I'm using. And now I can go in there and start figuring out that overall shape of the hair and how these curls work in the hair and how they fold over. And drawing curls in hair is very challenging and not something to be taken lightly. But then you notice the overall, and we've talked about this with character design, see that overall silhouette of the hair. So when I'm actually drawing in the hair, I need to start thinking about it as a silhouette. I hope I spelled that right. Because in this case, the hair is very, very loose, it's very long, it's sort of all over the place. So I'm just trying to get it reasonably close to what we're seeing. And at this point, it's getting a lot closer to where I feel like I could actually go in and probably finish it. But then there's things that I notice, like, and obviously I can do this because I'm doing it digitally, I notice the eyes are a little bit far apart. And I can move those in a little bit closer. And you notice now, and they're a little bit uneven too. But that's me being critical of my own drawing. That's me being able to actually look at it and go like, okay, what's working and what's not working? And that's something that you guys have to develop, sort of a critical eye to your own work. Because not everything that you do is going to be great. And it's not always going to be right. And that's something that as you do this more and more, you kind of have to get accustomed to saying, okay, what of this thing that I'm drawing is working and what of it isn't? So in this case, this isn't bad. Again, not something I'm completely in love with, but this is just a demo for you guys mostly. But this is essentially what sketching looks like. And I'm still not crazy about these eyes. Now they feel too close together, so let's actually move that a little bit. That feels a bit closer to me. But anyway, I wanted to do this for you guys' benefit. So this is sketching. And it's also observational drawing. And both of these are extraordinarily important to all three of you right now.